If you are a student in school or university, studying is a big part of your life. And the reason why you're studying is most likely because you want to get a good score, you need a good education, so you can have a happy life later. But oftentimes in the process of studying, we are already throwing out so much of our lives away because for some people, study can be such a negative and time-consuming thing. So you may find yourself sacrificing other parts of your life just so you can study. And I don't think that's a very healthy way to approach this. So in this video, I'll be sharing how I've learned to study less while achieving top scores in school. So I'll divide this video into 3 levels, and as you go up each level, you will need more effort and dedication, but you'll also be saving more time. So you can see what level you're currently at or what level you want to be, or you can slowly go up each level at a time until you're confident and comfortable. That's up to you. But anyways, after I share the 3 levels, I will also share a tip that has been a big game changer for me, not just in studying, but in life in general. And this tip has saved me so much time and made me a more happy person overall. So the first level is to replace passive learning with active learning. So when you passively study, the information is already there in front of you. And all you're doing is looking at the information and somehow hoping that it will fly into your brain. So passive learning includes rereading your notes or highlighting them or even rereading your textbook. And the problem with passive learning is you're not using any effort to retrieve the information. You're not using active recall. And oftentimes when you do this, what you have studied becomes short-term memory. So you may find yourself forgetting the majority of what you've learned as soon as you wake up on the next day. So instead of just passively looking at information, you should try studying actively instead. So active studying is when you actually retrieve the information yourself. And you can do this in so many ways. For example, you can read a page of your textbook, close it, and then write everything that you've remembered. Or you can make charts and diagrams to summarize an entire chapter. Or you can even make flashcards. Or you can go online and find some practice questions. Or you can use my favorite method where you pretend to be a teacher and you explain a concept to yourself as if you were a beginner. But anyways, all of the methods that I mentioned requires actual retrieval of your information. So you have to use brain power to recall what you have studied. And when you do this, what you study becomes long-term memory. So to sum it up, instead of passively studying where you're just looking at information, try actively studying instead. Actively studying is much more effective than passively studying, and you will be able to learn so much more information in a shorter amount of time. The second level is to study in bursts. And when I say study in bursts, just to be clear, I don't need the Pomodoro method, where you study for 25 minutes and take a 5-minute break. No, I want to zoom out a bit more. Instead of studying equally every day, which causes stress and burnout, what if we study in bursts instead? For example, study for 3 days and then take 1 day break. Now you may be wondering why. What's the purpose of taking a day off? Well, first of all, you're avoiding burnout. You're giving time to yourself to go do what you love, and this creates happiness and avoids burnout. But secondly, and I think this is the more important reason, you're giving yourself time to forget what you have studied so that after the break, you can use active recall to remember it again. So for example, you studied biology for 3 days and then you take 1 day break. So after that day, when you come back to biology again, you have to recall what you have studied previously, forming deeper connections and making it long-term memory. Now, I want to emphasize that this may not work for everyone. It's up to personal preference and what you like. But personally, using this method has been amazing for me. It frees up so much of my time without having to sacrifice studying. And oftentimes I find that on the day off or on the break day, I tend to get curious about what I've studied on the day before. So I start to wonder, why is it this way? Why is it not that way? And I start Googling and learn more information even on my break day. And this forms deeper connection and it makes me learn new things while being happy. So by taking a day off and stepping back from studying, I start to look at it from different perspectives and I start wondering different things. Therefore, I form deeper connections with it and it becomes embedded into my brain. But anyways, again, it is up to personal preference, but I highly recommend that you try this out for a few weeks and see how it goes. So now that you know to actively study by using brain power to retrieve information, and you know to study in bursts so you give yourself time to forget what you've learned, the third and final tip is to use spaced repetition. So spaced repetition is when you increase the intervals between each study session more and more every time. And to better understand this, let's look at the forgetting curve. So as you can see, the first time you study something, it will take you a very short amount of time to forget it. But if you review it again for the second time, it will now take you longer to forget the same piece of information. If you touch up again for the third time, it will also take longer to forget the information. So the intervals between each time you study can be increased over time, and you'd still be remembering the same amount of information. And to use spaced repetition, it requires a bit of planning. Your schedule can still be very flexible even if you use spaced repetition. So it can be something as simple as, for example, you have a mathematics exam in 10 days. So you say to yourself, I'm going to study this topic on the first day, and then I'm going to have 1 day break, and I'll touch up again on the third day. And after that, I'll have a 2-day break, and I'll touch it up again on the 6th day. And after that, I'll have a 3-day break, and I'll touch up again on the 9th day. So as you can see, the break time slowly increases. You're allowing yourself to forget a bit of what you've learned and use active recall to remember it again. It's kind of similar to the last level, but instead of just having 1-day breaks every time, the amount of break time you have is slowly increasing. So to sum the whole thing up, the first tip is when you use active learning instead of passive learning, and you can do this by retrieving the information by yourself, either by doing practice questions or making diagrams or explaining something to yourself. And the second level is to study in bursts. So instead of studying equally every day, take some rest days. Not only will this avoid burnout, but it will also give you a chance to forget what you've learned and remember it again. And you also start getting curious and form deeper connections. And the third and final level is to use spaced repetition. This is when you plan your studies so that the break time slowly increases. Now, before I share the life-changing tip, please consider subscribing to my channel because we're trying to reach 50 subscribers as fast as possible. So the life-changing tip that I want to share with you all is to use your small time pockets wisely. So we all have these little time gaps in our days, and we feel like it's too short to do anything valuable. For example, you may have a free time of 8 minutes between 2 meetings, or you may spend 10 minutes traveling from the school to your house. No matter how small the time is, do not underestimate what can be done. So what I like to do is, when I have these small time pockets, I would pick a random topic that I'm struggling at, and I'd explain it to myself as if I was a beginner. So as I said before, this uses active recall, and you're forming deeper connections and making it long-term memory. So you can actually study a lot in these small time pockets without having to use a lot of equipment. And before I started doing this, I thought that it would make my day so much more packed and scheduled and unflexible and fixed. But as soon as I started doing it, it achieved the opposite. It made me feel so much free during my day, and it gave me a sense of proudness and accomplishment that I'm moving more and more towards my goal every day. And you don't get that feeling just by scrolling through social media. And of course, this doesn't just apply with studying. You can do almost anything in these small time pockets that you have. For example, if you play basketball, you can visualize yourself shooting free throws or three-pointers so that the next time you step on the court, your form will be perfect. Or if you want to write a book, you can add a few sentences every time you have these small time pockets. Whatever it is, you should never underestimate what can be achieved in these small time pockets throughout the day. There's a YouTuber called Max Bosch who got married in 3 minutes. So think about that. But anyways, my whole point is to use your small time pockets wisely.